Over this last week, I have been posting segments of this interview that I did with South African workers' leader, socialist, and sociology professor Trevor Ngwane. Here is the full, unedited video of that interview, which was an hour and 3/4 long. So we're talking here with Trevor Ngwane. He is a longtime worker leader and socialist, and he's also an author. He was an author of a book, Grassroots Democracy in South African Shack Settlements, and he's also a professor of sociology at the University of Johannesburg. So it's a great pleasure to be able to talk with you again, Trevor.
Thank you, John.
Yeah. So I've been wanting to get back to you for quite some time, but the specific thing that kind of stimulated in particular was the recent meeting between Ramaphosa and Trump. And I'm sure that was covered very thoroughly in the press there. And I'm very interested to know, like, how it was covered there. What is what are the different views of that meeting, and what are your views also?
Yeah, no, that was an amazing scene actually, and it surprised everyone here. And then, of course, this being South Africa, there's a definite split between those who think Ramaphosa and the government delegation, and the other people he brought with him, such as the golfers and Rupert, the billionaire. So that group feel that, they bungled it. Yeah, they fumbled it. They didn't play their cards well. In fact, they let the country down, so to speak. And then the other opinion is that they handle it well, can you see? So there's this view that, hey, I mean, Trump is a mad guy or whatever he is, but Ramaphosa was able to keep his cool, to try and keep the meeting focused. Of course, both sides agree that, what happened was completely unexpected, actually basically crazy, you know what I mean? Yeah. But here, so in this country, there's usually not a lot of shades of gray. So if you talk to people, they either fall this side. It was very bad, Ramaphosa. Why did he take the billionaire? Why did he take the whites? Only the whites spoke. Trump listened only when the white man spoke, this and that. Also, there's this question of the white guy, his minister, who actually is the leader of the opposition, but now they are in a government of national unity. So there's a feeling here, that is the critics, that he didn't speak for the government. He spoke for his own party, saying his party entered the government of national unity to actually stop these radicals or this rebel. I think he called them rebel, or one of the white men called the political party economic freedom fighters, and the other political party Umkhonto weSizwe, associated with Zuma. So that was that. I think on the left, or let's say more on the right or center right, those who feel that Ramaphosa played his cards well. I think firstly, of course, there is that kind of inherent nationalism, he's our guy. He's representing South Africa. So we have to stand with him. So there is a general view which I can see. But also, there's that feeling that given Trump's erratic behavior and also given South Africa's more or less economic dependence or strong reliance on US American business, Ramaphosa had no other way but to try and flatter Trump, and he couldn't really stand his ground or confront Trump. And then also there's the view that he played his cards well by bringing, the golfers who apparently Trump asked for the golfers, and also bringing billionaire Johann Rupert, who it turns out is a friend of Trump. They used to hang out together in New York, in the 70s, something like that. On the other hand, the critics say, no, but you as president, you should speak for all South Africans. You don't have to bring white people to speak for white people. Can you see? So you are actually, so they feel that Ramaphosa fell into the racialization, of politics. So in a way, it's a critique of why Ramaphosa's response should bow down to Trump's racism or his prejudice. So it's like that, yeah.
Is that your view?
Yeah, my view, yeah, I'm critical, about the whole thing, especially how it, of course, I'm very critical of Trump. So that's where I should start because, he's an imperialist, he's right-wing populist, he's a bully. And in fact, I would say you find a situation these days of fascists without fascism. Can you see? Yeah. So that's the first critique. With Ramaphosa or with the South African delegation, especially the new government of national unity, I think that the South African government is retreating from its mandate of national liberation. Can you see? Because remember, the whole struggle against apartheid was not just about getting rid of racism, but was also for economic justice. Can you see? I don't know which great revolutionary in Africa once said, maybe in America, I don't know, but he once said, hey, the whites don't come to Africa just to clobber, our heads, with sticks. They're here for the economy, they want the wealth. Can you see? And then you should understand the racism, their ideology, the justifications, the repression as part of carrying out, that economic mission. So to summarize my point of view, John, I would say Africa is not for sale. Can you see? So what came out strongly for me was that Africa is for sale. Remember, Trump said, they're going to come and kiss my ass. Yeah, we must go and kiss his ass because Africa is for sale. We can't, take care of our people. We can't develop our economies without American investment. I'm not saying, that is a fantasy. It's a reality. But viewed broadly, now just to maybe say something which an American audience can relate to. You know that on Sunday, 25 May, which is like a few days after this debacle, it was Africa Day. You know what I mean? Yeah, that's the day is celebrated in everywhere in Africa. That's the day the Organization of African Unity was formed by Kwame Nkrumah and the great leaders. Yeah, yeah. Now, the vision at that time was, at least Nkrumah, who was a socialist, by the way, was a radical form of Pan-Africanism, which was captured in his slogan, a United States of Africa. So he wanted to overcome the colonial national borders. As you know, Britain colonized South Africa, France colonized Cote d'Ivoire, Portugal colonized Mozambique. So it was like that, Belgium, Congo. So the vision of Nkrumah and the Pan-Africanists was that we should unite the whole of Africa. I think maybe even if, that was a long shot, but they were rebelling against the imposed colonial borders. Because remember, John, some of these borders, they would split a family in half. You know what I mean? Because because there was this Berlin conference, they said and said, okay, you take this side, I take this side. So there was no recognition of economic, social, cultural. Yeah. So to speak to the American audience, so when we celebrate Africa Day, I'm just saying this because, we had an event here, a local event. There was a lot of talking. I also gave a talk myself. So when we think of Africa Day, we also think of the African diaspora. We also think of our brothers and sisters, Black Americans, African Americans. And we ask ourselves, we remind ourselves how they got to be in America. They weren't there slaves, can you see? Yeah. And they were taken by force. They were sold, whether at the port of departure or certainly when they got to America, the West Indies. Can you see? So when we say Africa is for sale, we're not just talking about today's imperialism, today's capitalist exploitation, today's uneven development, today's Trump's protectionism, is asserting, might is right. We also think about all those people who were bought and sold, in Africa. So there is that real sense that what happened at the Oval Office is so painful. It's an insult, to that history, to that struggle for reparations, for healing. Can you see? So Ramaphosa and them, for them, it's economic pragmatism. This is our biggest trading partner. We must just do our best. So it's like that, John. Okay, on the other end, when Ramaphosa went to meet Trump, that same week, the big story in South Africa was the unemployment figures. So our unemployment rate, it's called the expanded definition. When you count everyone who's unemployed, it's at 40%. Can you see? More than 40%. With the youth, it's more than 60%. So there is a view that Ramaphosa, our government, must do everything and anything to actually make sure that the situation doesn't get worse. But of course, Trump knows. That's why he insults countries like Lesotho. No one even knows it exists. He knows that because of uneven development, even the UK, even the United Kingdom, there is economic desperation, which is a political challenge for prime ministers, for presidents. Everyone wants to make sure that their economies grow, that they can take care of their people. But in doing that, it becomes competitive, it becomes divided, and it ends up being a question of allowing right wingers like Trump, who have managed to grab power. He's not the only one. Trumpism, the Orban in Hungary, you know, I think there's someone in Italy, yeah, and things like that. Yeah, so just to conclude, I don't think that the response should be to think that with an unemployment rate of 40%, somehow, if we sort things out with Trump, there is going to be economic liberation. Indeed, I can even ask the question, it's exactly that relationship with America, with global capitalism, which has left South Africa with an unemployment rate of 40%. Can you see? Yeah, because all the wealth, profit repatriation. And Trump's deal is not to actually help the countries, is to squeeze them more. You know what I mean? Yeah, because we know where he's coming from. The American economy is declining. John, the reason it's declining is because capitalism itself is in crisis. The biggest capitalist economy in the world is going to have a problem when the very system which it's on top of, is in crisis. So I think I'll just stop there. Yeah, yeah. So we can have a conversation.
Yeah, well, there's a couple things that you raised that really set the wheels turning in my head. I mean, for one thing, I think that the comparison between Trump's meeting with Ramaphosa and his meeting with Zelensky are quite obvious. And my own view is that, Zelensky here was criticized for standing up to Trump. I think he did the right thing. But anyway, I'm guessing that Ramaphosa had that in mind when he met with Trump. On the issue of the Pan-African League and African unity, and the first thing that comes to my mind is the Arab League. And so it strikes me that the question is really, unity of who? Unity of the capitalist governments or unity of the working class? What are your thoughts about that?
Exactly. So that question, John, it's very deep, because remember, there's this idea now that we are choosing between the East and the West. We are choosing between, BRICS, China, and the EU or America. But in China, what is happening there, it's what we call capitalist restoration. Can you see? So it's abandoning the socialist vision and project. In Russia, we might be nostalgic about the Russian Revolution, but Russia is neoliberal. Can you see? Yeah. So that's the real confusion. And I can also relate that, take it further. So there's this whole thing about how Trump is backtracking from what I can call multilateralism, the idea that, there should be regulations, the United Nations, there should be the World Trade Organization, whatever. But the truth is that multilateralism did not do much to stop the suffering of the working class, not only in the global south, but sometimes in the global north. Can you see? Yeah. So I remember I once went to the US, I think Washington, Georgetown University is in Washington, yeah.
Yeah.
And then there was this panel discussion. I think they had a whole lot of things. But in my panel, I was taken aback because everyone on the panel, and they all left, was saying, yeah, Trump is moving us away from the World Trade Organization, is moving us away from the IMF and World Bank, as if those institutions, as if we have never called for their abolition. Can you see? Yeah. So the rise of the right wing actually is confusing the left. Can you see? Yeah. Yeah. Now, I'm not just talking about left governments. I just mean the ordinary left, like you and I. Yeah. Where now suddenly we South Africans, as I mentioned, we must now root for Ramaphosa because it's our government. Can you see? Yeah. 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 So I think this whole thing really, at the heart of it, it's class struggle. It's a capitalist crisis. And when there's a capitalist crisis, the bosses always try to make the working class to pay. Making poorer countries or developing countries or third world countries pay a price is part of that class dynamic, if you know what I'm trying to say. Yeah, yeah, it's part of the class dynamic. Yeah, so yeah, I agree with you. Even Pan-Africanism, it should be, let's say, revolutionary Pan-Africanism, calling for socialism, uh, calling for, I don't know, workers' power, workers' governments. So this is, to me, it's a default position. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, there's huge differences between Trump and other, former administrations. But there's also, in some ways, it seems to me, Trump is just a more crude expression of them because even under Obama, Biden, Clinton, all of them, it was still like in the case of South Africa, put the South African working class on rations so that we can make profits. But it was disguised by a smiling face. And with Trump, it's just crude. Yeah, look, you make a deal so that I personally can make some money and my cronies can make some money, and that's all we care about.
Yeah, basically, the the velvet glove is off, so
Right.
it's bare knuckles now. But it has always been the iron fist. Do you know what I mean? Yeah, yeah, yeah. Now, even with things like, let's say, bourgeois democracy has always been the dictatorship of the bourgeoisie, whether it's the Democratic Party or the Republican Party or the African National Congress. Can you see? Yeah, yeah. So, but now all pretense is gone now. Now, might is right. If you have got the money, if you have got the power, if you have got the bombs, you can bomb Palestine to smithereens. There's no consequence.
Right.
If you have got the money, you can exploit the poor. You can exploit, the working class. No consequence. That same attitude you will find even at the workplace. Bosses now feel, oh, why should we have a union? I'm giving you, a chance to make a living. Foreign direct investment, you know, it's not as if when they do foreign direct investment, they're coming here as a charity to donate to Africa or global South countries. No, they're here to make a profit. Can you see? Yeah. And as soon as they can't make a profit, they pull out. And in fact, once they're here, they start demanding tax concessions, all sorts of, I don't know, kickbacks, concessions from these third world governments. Yeah.
Well, I wanted to skip to another question. So we see, like in a lot of countries in the world, what they call right-wing populism, the MAGA movement. You see it in Germany with the AfD, Italy, Britain, also in India with Hindutva. But it seems to me that you haven't seen something like that so much in Africa. And so,
Yeah.
what are your thoughts about that? And also, how do you see, is there any relationship between the absence of that development in Africa and the rise of Julius Malema and the economic freedom fighters?
Yeah, well, John, it just so happens that in my that topic is a pet topic of mine, the rise of right-wing populism in South Africa, in Africa. Can you see? And I can tell you the problem exists here. Yeah, it exists. Yeah. For example, you remember that in South Africa, we have these incidents of xenophobia, like violent attacks on migrants from Mozambique, from Ethiopia. It happens regularly.
And that's
The first,
still going on?
the sentiment is still there.
Okay.
Can you see? So, for example, that party of Zuma, MK, Umkhonto weSizwe, there's a strong anti-immigrant sentiment in there. Fortunately for us, the Economic Freedom Front of Julius Malema supports opening of the borders. Can you see? Yeah. Although commentators say that's why he loses votes. So that tells you another story, isn't it? Yeah. But listen, populists come in two shapes. Is the right wing and the left wing. But populists, they are chameleons. So remember, Mussolini started off as a socialist. Can you see? Yeah. And someone like Trump, I can call him a fascist without fascism, a racist, but they also make it up as they go along because for them, it's power. Can you see? We know very well that the reason why right-wing, far-right parties made gains or are making gains in Europe is that they learn to modify their message. Can you see? Yeah, they modify their message. Sometimes they camouflage it. Can you see? Yeah, so definitely, I think there is in fact, I was even thinking we must start discussing here because how fascists work. So right-wing populism is a broad category, and then fascism is an extreme violent form of right-wing populism. That's my understanding. Can you see? Yeah. And then it means there can be a slide, depending on conditions, depending on the response of the working class and other governments. If you look at the rise of Hitler, everything which other countries did was almost facilitating him to grow because, okay, leave the guy. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So we do have that challenge in South Africa. But I must say, John, we only got our independence here 30 years ago. Can you see? Yeah. So apartheid was defeated in 1994. Can you see? This doesn't excuse the ANC for all the mess, continuing with austerity, with anti-working class policies. But politically, there are certain things which are not yet possible in South Africa. Of course, with right-wing populism, especially anti-immigrant xenophobia, We've got movements here against xenophobia organized by the left. But we've seen that in the last local government election, even the last election last year, which led to this government of national unity, some of the smaller parties, they got in using an anti-immigrant platform, such as we've got a flamboyant guy, Gayton Mackenzie, his party, the Patriotic Alliance. He famously came up with the slogan, the Zulu slogan, Mabahambe, they must go away. So he meant, people from, and today he's part of the government of national unity. He's a sports minister, and he's like the guy, those ministers, mavericks, who are always saying things. Yeah. Also, recently we had a crisis here of passing the budget because the government of national unity could not agree on a budget. The issue was VAT, okay? Yeah. Value-added tax. So the ANC wanted that, but in the end, it didn't happen. Okay. Yeah. But that party, the opposition, John Steenhuisen, Democratic Alliance, refused to pass the budget. The ANC only managed to pass the budget by bringing in some political parties who are outside the government of national unity. One of them is Action SA, the party of business millionaire Herman Mashaba. His party is also anti-immigrant. Can you see?
Yeah. Is that a white party or not?
No, that's a black party. Yeah.
And
so the Patriotic Alliance of Gayton Mackenzie, it's a black party, but it's a so-called colored party, people of mixed race. Yeah. So it's colored nationalism. Yeah, so, which we detest here.
So around the world, all the anti-immigrant and nationalist movements, I don't know about all of them, but they tend to also be, obviously racist, but that's a different thing in South Africa, but also very much male supremacist. The nuclear family, also anti-LGBTQ, just a traditional male-female roles and that sort of thing. You see something like that also in those parties?
Not a lot, but certainly. So I would say a clear-cut right-wing populist party, which, the world would pay attention to, besides this colored party, would be Zuma's MK party. Yeah. Now, remember, Zuma is a Zulu nationalist. Zuma is a polygamist. Zuma is homophobic. I mean, he said openly, Zuma is misogynistic, in the sense of being anti-woman. So, remember, and his party is relatively new. It was formed a few months before the 2024 May election, which saw the ANC lose its majority, and we have this government of national unity. Yeah. But Zuma's message was real right-wing. He was busy with the churches. He was busy with the chiefs. Here it's called traditional leaders.
I'm sorry, say that again.
Talking traditional leaders.
Oh,
traditional leaders.
Yeah.
So this is like the chiefs, Induna, the kings. Yeah. Here they are not a progressive force at all. Can you see? Yeah, because the laws which govern, upon which their rule is based, these traditional leaders, these chiefs, is very anti-woman. Can you see? It's Yeah, it's patriarchal. Yeah, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But now Zuma, when his party took power or won, got his votes, and remember, the first party in South Africa is ANC. Okay, it lost its majority, but it's still number one, 40%. The second party is this white party. Well, it's not really all white. There's black people there, but, it's history. Yeah, and it's politics. Democratic Alliance. The third one was the Economic Freedom Fighters of Julius Malema. Let's call them left populists. But I'll come back to them. Yeah. Now, when Zuma came with his party, he displaced these economic freedom fighters and became the third largest. Can you see? Yeah. And then one critique was, what does MK stand for? Because they're coming with ridiculous ideas like to fight unemployment, they're going to have, army conscription, military conscription. Can you see? Women, teenage pregnancy, they're going to fight it by sending the pregnant women to Robben Island. Some real crazy right-wing ideas. But as soon as they won or, got their positions, they did very well in KwaZulu-Natal, the Zulu nationalist base of Zuma. Then they started modifying their message. Can you see? Yeah. They started modifying their message. I think now they started smelling power. And some big guys, Zuma is also connected to some bourgeois, black bourgeoisie, whatever, even white bourgeoisie. So they said, no, there's a possibility that you could take power again. So if you say these things, you'll never, you know what I mean? So they modified, but there's still some telling things. So, for example, he got people to become members of parliament, to be parliamentarians, some who are poster boys for corruption, you know what I mean? Yeah, so they're known for being corrupt in running the railway system, in running our energy system here. So this is what right-wing populists do, They peg the government with crooks and scoundrels because exactly they don't want opposition within the cabinet when they start pushing their, okay, most of them are corrupt, the big leader must be rich. Everyone knows. Zuma wants, he's taking care of his family. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. And then if he works with you, he's going to reward you with money, with position, with power, but everything revolves around him. Exactly what Trump is doing. Can you see? Yeah. Now, just to shift a bit, to complicate it, now with the economic freedom fighters who, let's call them left populists, can you see? So they are the ones calling for, yes, we got our political freedom, but we didn't get our economic emancipation. Okay? We must nationalize the banks, nationalize the mines. We must get the land back. Can you see? Yeah. As a footnote, Umkhonto weSizwe, MK is now saying that too. Can you see? So they are adopting a left posture. Can you see? Yeah. And they're discarding some of that misogynistic, patriarchal. So that's Malema's position. But the problem now is that as a populist, and that's how he's ridiculed, Julius Malema as the leader of this EFF. He's ridiculed for being, they call him flip-flop. So when it comes to certain positions, maybe, to be fair, maybe some nuanced positions, you know what I mean? Yeah, but he like promiscuously flip-flops, you know what I mean? Like, hey, but yesterday you were saying this, now you're saying that, to an extent that I'm not certain that if he were to become president and take power, he'd stick to left populism. He might slide to the right. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. So that's, do you know what I mean? In any case, I don't want to do a whole critique of him personally. He's got an ANC background. He's a millionaire. He made his money whilst he was still in the ANC. So he's a boss, basically. Can you see? Yeah, but his party, his program is called Marxist Leninist Fanonian, like Franz Fanon. Yeah.
You know,
But just one last point there so that you understand this. Because now, remember that guy, the Minister of Agriculture, the white guy in that delegation, yeah, he said the problem in South Africa is this Economic Freedom Front, fighters, Malema, and this MK, can you see? Yeah. Now, a guy, let's call him a comrade, who used to work closely with Malema. They were like, peas in a pod, defected to MK. Can you see? Yeah. And then he's helping MK to build the structures. He became an organizer, and then now he's the Secretary General. So you can see now, there's now let's say there's a continuum from left to right. Can you see? Yeah. So yeah, no, this is the problem actually. Yeah. It's quite confusing. Yeah.
I mean, it's far from exactly the same. But one thing that I think of, and you see this in other parts of the world, including here, is, Gregor Strasser of the old Nazi Party, who used left-wing anti-capitalist propaganda to recruit workers and the unemployed into the Nazis.
Amazing.
So
yeah.
But what you said about Zuma and MK, I think that the 21st century ideology of fascism is really defined as what they call traditionalism. Like in Russia, the Russian people must return to all the great traditions of Tsar Nicholas and so on. In the Scandinavian countries, Odinism, and return to the great traditions of the Vikings and so on. And in the United States, it's something similar, with the theme of white supremacy being dominant. But also within all of those, you see this strong misogyny, which you mentioned. And so it strikes me that some of what you described about Zuma and MK is part of that traditionalist ideology.
There's no doubt.
Yeah.
There's no doubt. And except that now they are putting this left facade. Can you see? Yeah.
So
and also, remember, it depends on conditions also, because it depends which parties are there. In the national political sphere, which movements are there? How strong are the unions? Where are they looking? So when MK comes, MK finds the EFF. Can you see? Yeah. At a time when the ANC loses its majority. So the MK and EFF, they had a certain kind of understanding. Can you see? Yeah. But then I think they still do, but then they found that they are fishing from the same pond. Can you see?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
So,
yeah.
do you see a chance for them to form an alliance? Or are they more rivals, or how do you see their relationship?
Well, it didn't help when this guy crossed the floor and joined MK. That really, and he was not the only one. Some some top EFF people, for example, there's a guy called Dalimpo who is like a lawyer here, famous lawyer. He also moved to MK. So there was a moment when MK pushed EFF out of position 3, some EFF top leaders crossed the floor. Can you see? Yeah. And then the worst part about that is that Julius Malema was suggesting that they had that acted as a fifth column within EFF to help Zuma to win votes. So the betrayal had happened beforehand. Yeah.
Is there any chance?
So even though now, logically they have to have an alliance and face the ANC. So that's creating a problem. My last point there is that remember also, both of them are big men parties. So is Zuma, is Malema. Can you see? Yeah. But they have met, even long time they meet. But also remember, Malema was expelled by Zuma from the ANC. So it's like, it's a bit of a mix
Right.
up. Yeah.
Yeah. Amongst all the capitalists, they can be allies, but also rivals at the same time. What they say is no honor amongst thieves. So,
Yeah.
is there any chance that the two of them together could form a majority government?
I don't think that if such an opportunity, I think they'll take it. Yeah. Yeah, they'll take it. I think.
I mean, could they gain that large of a base?
I think if things go real bad, yeah. But at the moment, I don't think so because, the ANC failed so much whilst representing itself as some kind of left. Can you see? Yeah, to the extent that certainly the middle classes here, they feel that, and also some working class people, maybe it's going to work if we work together with the whites. So, John, here there's desperation. 40% unemployment is not a joke. Can you see? Yeah. And remember, we had 15 years of erratic electricity supply. So the lights just go off for 8 hours. You know what I mean? Recently, we now have this problem of water. So, I'm in Soweto now in Johannesburg. If I go and check my tap, the water might not be there.
Is that because
it's kind of
or infrastructure or both?
Yeah, it's maintenance. Yeah, it's poor. It's management, poor management. Right. Yeah, and remember also, those problems they tend to hit working class areas more than. Also, there's less alternatives for the poor. Can you see? Yeah. So there's a lot of desperation. Even this xenophobia, I would say the black working class in South Africa has a history of unity, accommodation with Mozambique. I mean, people marry Mozambicans, Zimbabweans, Even me, I've got so many cousins, in Zimbabwe, Of course, they're all here now. You know what I mean? Because there was always that interaction. So, but the desperation for jobs, then makes the ground fertile for right-wing populists to actually, stoke hatred. Yeah.
Right. So it's more economic competition than anything else as far as the nationalism.
I would say so because look, Mandela convinced the black working class, look, let's make peace with the whites. And they did. Do you know what I mean? I remember at the moment building up to the first democratic election, some radicals, but people are just saying, no, let's rebuild the country, Yeah, oh, okay, they were kicking us around. They'll stop doing it now. Can you see? Can you see? What about the wealth? We'll work on it. So there is that more, let's say, political patience. Can you see? But now that patience is being tested. Yeah, because of the desperation.
So would it be accurate to say then, I still remember the tremendous struggles of the 1980s, which were an inspiration around the world. And I'm guessing that it established very powerful traditions, including working class solidarity amongst Black South African workers. So would it be correct to say that some of those traditions still live on?
Exactly. That's why there are some things the government, whoever, just cannot do. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
Even xenophobia. People are not happy, when you attack, and it's more than political, it's like, no man, Do you know what I mean? Yeah. But of course, if you whip up, if you work at it, can you see? Yeah, then because with these anti-immigrant violent groups, we had a social movement here called Operation Dudula. Dudula means to bulldoze. They
Operation what?
Dudula. So it's Zulu for to bulldoze, Dudula. During the days of Shaka Zulu, when you are in a war, you Dudula the other the other army. Yeah. So when they started, they were using right-wing populist techniques, right by the book, social media, sophisticated bots. You know, that thing of multiplying, Twitter feeds and things. Yeah, they were doing that. Yeah. Also, flooding the zone in the mainstream. Can you see? Yeah, and that people were always in the media, whatever. Can you see? Yeah, and that worked out their message. So it really happened. But when they lost steam in terms of that intervention, let's say from the top, yeah, then suddenly, can you see? Although, like I say, these small political parties, some of them took it up. Can you see? And then when they tried to run in the elections, they got zero. Can you see? Yeah. This operation to do, they got nothing.
Does that have, excuse me, does that have more of a base amongst the hardcore unemployed and also the unofficial economy and like people who are like have their own small business than it does amongst that people who are actually working, employed for.
Yeah.
You know,
It's the
so
petit bourgeoisie.
that would be
Is that
like I can just imagine if I had my own little small store in my in my front room, or let's say a little bar or something like that. I might see people from Zimbabwe or Mozambique as competition. You know?
John? John, everything you've read about the social roots of fascism is happening here.
Right.
If you've got the eyes to see, yeah.
Yeah.
If you've got the eyes to, that's what actually that's what fascinates me. You remember I said I've got this special interest because they just do all the things which when you read Trotsky, this is what is happening. Yeah,
Right.
of course, conditions. Remember, we are kind of semi-peripheral country. There is a history of racial capitalism, colonialism. So there will be those differences, nuances. But the right-wing populists, straight down, same playbook.
Yeah.
Same playbook. Yeah, same playbook.
I have to say, it is somewhat different in the United States, and I think also in some other countries. And it's very confusing to a lot of people who think they're Marxists, in that there's a very big section of the US working class, for instance, auto workers and so on, who support MAGA. And all of it, including the harsh anti-immigrant measures and all the rest of it. So it is a bit different here, maybe. But maybe
yeah.
So
but the thing is, John, so my theory, which is probably not unique, I don't think that you remember Marx says or Engels, Marxism is not a dogma. You know what I mean?
yeah.
So it's not that when fascism comes, it will follow and have the same attributes as what has happened before.
Exactly.
So that's the thing. That's why I say they're chameleons. And basically they just want to get away with their power mongering, money, violence. And remember, everyone knows Trump during his election campaign, he's testing the water basically. Do you know what I mean? He says things, then he watches what's the response. Can you see? Yeah. And then when he took power, he knew exactly what to do.
Yeah.
But even now, when he's confusing everyone now, because then he changes. Can you see? Of course, he's got a team, people, discussion within his group, maybe 2 factions or 3 factions. I don't know. But they are highly adaptable. Can you see? Yeah. So it means the slide to fascism or the road to fascism will be like that. So something unexpected is going to happen. I remember there is a group here called Keep Left. So they had a discussion on Trumpism. And then I went there, they asked me to speak. And then their guy, I think one of their members from the floor also picked it up. That no, but even though it's the same playbook, but it don't happen exactly, Yeah, so there'll be things which are unfamiliar or which are new, and because they're such opportunists, they'll build on that. Can you see? And before you know it, fascism is here full blown.
Right.
I think maybe with if we go back to Roosevelt, the New Deal, yeah. So we can juxtaposition Germany and the USA in the 30s. Yeah, you know what I mean? Yeah, post the Great Depression. There was something in the USA which did not allow a fascist turn. And there was something in Germany which allowed such a turn. Of course, Roosevelt and Hitler, they intervened strongly. They are great men, whatever. Can you see? But one could actually say, oh, maybe there's a strong movement or there's no tradition like this. For example, the USA did not lose the First World War. You know what I mean? Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. The USA had a tradition of, say, rebelling against empire, the British Empire. So there were certain institutions which actually kind of ruled out of court, the fascist slide. Yeah. But that didn't happen in Germany. That didn't happen in Italy. Can you see? Yeah. Japan, you can see now Japan with its more traditionalist authority. So it kind of moved towards, the Hitler path,
Yeah.
so to speak. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about what's happening in the workers' movements and yeah, the like grassroots movement from below, resistance and so on, and also in connection with the genuine left there. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Okay, well, we're in a bad situation here, bad state. Yeah, with mass movements, with the trade unions, um, with the left, even with the far left. Can you see? Yeah, because basically what happened is uh, the anti-apartheid movement at the point of taking power or of defeating apartheid, it was decapitated because the whole leadership was sucked into bourgeois parliamentary bourgeois corporatist structures. Can you see? Yeah. So this is what happened. So I remember the first thing which should happen after local councillors, political representatives were elected in Soweto, they would move to town. Can you see? Yeah. So the guy is elected to represent this place, but they immediately moved to town. For bourgeois, and the competition. I was in the ANC. The competition, the political competition, was directly linked to self-enrichment. Can you see? Yeah. So that whole leadership, that whole left, including the Southern Communist Party, forget about their inherent weaknesses. Even if they were good people, but they lost their way. Yeah, they lost their way. And then but the trade union movement, like you are saying, because of the strength of that movement in the 80s, because of what it achieved, can you see? Because it was never defeated, there's never been a clear-cut battle between the bourgeoisie or a bourgeois state and the working class in South Africa. So it continued. But the politics of class collaboration on top, the leaders were making money. They created Mandela and them, a direct escalator from top union official to parliament. Can you see? That's Mandela. And then the bosses, they created an escalator from top union official to CEO of a company. Can you see? That's what happened. Ramaphosa is a billionaire. He was the leader of the National Union of Mine Workers. Can you see? Yeah, yeah. So that's what happened. Now,
if I could just interrupt 1 second, what you're talking about that, I was in. Do you were you familiar with the Committee for Workers International?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
They had a group in
Wise
South
men and them.
Africa, yeah, Marxist Workers Tendency of the ANC. And I remember going to conferences. This would have been in the late 1980s. I remember two young women from that group who were very strong, powerful young women who I found out later became millionaires.
Oh,
So
wow.
that's an example of what you're talking about.
And from the Marxist workers' tendency,
Yes,
imagine.
exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. So just think of people from the Southern Communist Party. They're like sitting ducks. They're like sitting ducks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway,
So
go ahead with
now,
what you're saying. Yeah.
yeah. So remember, we had a movement here. I think from the year 2000 to 2005. We had the Soweto Electricity Crisis Committee. We had the Anti-Privatization Forum. Basically, so in Soweto, we're organizing around energy, access to water for the working class. That movement, at the forefront of that movement, were grannies, grandmothers. You know what I mean? Yeah. The reason, of course, they are in charge of the council houses. Can you see? Yeah. But it's because the unions turned their backs on that movement. It got no support whatsoever. Can you see? Yeah. Because Kosatu was with the ANC and the Communist Party, whatever. So even those independent grassroots movements found themselves either sidelined, ignored, or repressed, certainly denigrated. Can you see? Yeah. So, you know, small guys like me, suddenly you are being talked about in very high circles of government. Do you know what I mean? Like, who is this guy, Trevor? No, these people are misleading our people. So there was a real concerted effort by the ANC and the Communist Party in collaboration with COSATU leadership, can you see? And the civic movement. Their organization was called SANCO, South African National Civic Organization, to actually squash any left independent effort or initiative. Can you see? Now, today, the results of that are clear. Can you see? Yeah. And it's worse now because there's all this confusion about the global south and the global north, about China and Russia, nostalgia about Russia, admiration for Putin amongst some comrades. Remember what happened with our Workers' Party, with NUMSA, the Socialist Revolutionary Workers' Party. Yeah, we supported it. It was funded probably by the Chinese, but certainly through that guy, the billionaire. Who's that guy? Singham or something.
Neville Singham, yeah.
Yes, yeah. Who was doing a mess in the USA too. Yeah. And it destroyed that thing, man. Just through pure money. Can you see? Yeah. So now the left. So there are some, let's say, green shoots among the far left, but the ones I've seen, the most prominent, they are sectarian. So they say things like, I will never work with Keep Left. We'll never work with Socialist Group. I'm Socialist Group. Yeah, because they represent an old politics. So these are the people who are trying to find a new politics. So they want what they call democratic civic politics. Can you see? Yeah. So look, I understand. It's they're trying to change tactics, strategy. It's all desperate. Um, Even when we're doing those movements like the Landless People's Movement, Anti-Privatization Forum, Soweto Risk Crisis Committee, the theorization was these are the new social movements. Can you see? Yeah. But that also neglected to see the continuities, with the past, you know. And remember also, if you don't see the continuities, like we're still fighting for the same thing, basically, then there's also no continuity with the methods. You see, so you don't learn from the past. You're trying to draw a line, between what happened before. Yeah. So this is the issue. Yeah, yeah. So the left. Well, I think the last blow was the so-called NUMSA moment. When the Metal Workers Union split from the ANC, from the alliance. Then they formed the United Front, and then they formed the Socialist Workers Revolutionary Party. But it turned out that the leadership, besides being confused by the millions, was still essentially Stalinist, or they hadn't shaken off their Stalinist habits, which is not trusting the working class, socialism from above, etc., etc. Yeah. Class collaboration. Class collaboration.
It strikes me, Trevor, two things that I would draw from what you're saying is what you talk about absence of continuity, but then, as you just said, in a way there is a continuity, but people aren't really conscious of it. And that's the continuity of the Stalinist traditions. And you see the same thing here, I think, in the left is, all that stuff from the left, from the history of the whatever, of 50 years ago, we don't need to think about that. And in actuality, what they're doing is they're adopting the traditions of Stalinism. But since there's not a serious look at that history, nobody really knows it except for a few people at the top.
One day we had, because, whatever negative assessment I have, people try. So we had this meeting. For example, NUMSA abandoned the United Front, but we still continue with our little tiny United Front, Also, exactly, for that continuity, it embodies, hey, this is what you started, you forgot about it. So we had, so there is a movement here around climate change. So, so sometimes the left find space there and do things.
Sorry, a movement on what did you say? Diamond
climate change, climate justice.
Climate change. Okay,
yeah, climate justice. Yeah. So but remember, those movements, they tend to be funded through NGOs, so they can continue. Yeah. So some of the left end up there. Certainly, as socialists, we support, those initiatives. We support, yeah. So as United Front, so we had this successful, I think 2 or 3 workshops in Soweto, yeah, in one area, and they were good, We even had that guy, the so-called father of environmental racism from Texas. He's a professor. Yeah, Robert something. Yeah, Ballard, I think. Yeah, but in any case. So this guy had come to get an honorary degree. So we brought him to Soweto. He's an academic and he wrote books about environmental racism in the US. So it was all inspiring, you know. And then, so in all the discussions, but not the one where he was there, I think the following workshop, one youth stood up and said, he didn't even say comrades. He said, elders, you know what the problem is? We as the youth, we don't know what is socialism. Yeah. Please help us. You know, like it was, you know, like everyone. Yeah, yeah. So me, I started a little group, you know, with some youth. I still continue with them 2, 3 years later. But that's how it started. Like they just said, hey, we don't know about socialism. So there's been, when the movement was decapitated, it was decapitated. And then also remember, socially, the the striving to be middle class to make it. Yeah, yeah. To be middle class is not necessarily negative because it's people trying to improve their economic situation. And that's the model, I've got a car or whatever, or I'm educated. So, but that striving for upward social mobility was linked to a, a distancing from that tradition of struggle. Can you see? So moving up, people could not use their struggle techniques. Can you see? Yeah. Unless they were part of the inward cabal, which became corrupt. Do you know what I mean? But for ordinary people, so now you found parents, they didn't want, number one, there's passing now in education. So students are passed from a township to a school in town. Can you see? Yeah, yeah. Those who can afford it, because remember, apartheid divided black or African, colored, Indians. So the blacks or the Africans would pass their kids to Indian schools or to colored schools. Can you see? Yeah, yeah. And then there was a kind of anti-indigenous language sentiment among parents, you know. So you must just study English. Can you see? I'm just saying about things which I experienced, like because I was busy growing my kids, Yeah, having to fight with parents in parents' meetings. No, but we need at least one African language. No, no. Can you see? So this is what was happening. So imagine politically, they are not talking about politics with their own kids. You know what I mean? Yeah, yeah. So there's that real rapture. Yeah, there's that rapture.
You see something similar here. I mean, it was a little longer ago, but the radicalism, the movements of the 1960s and 70s, and I would say by 2000, almost everybody that was deeply involved in those movements in the 60s and 70s had basically made their peace with capitalism in one way or another.
Exactly. That's the issue. But there, John, the biggest power of capitalism now, or of the bosses, whether is a Trump type, is the idea that there is no alternative. Can you see? Yeah. So that's why I'm so opposed to Chinese capitalist restoration, even though they were never a proper worker state. You know what I mean? Yeah. So, or even Russia. Yeah. So now the idea that there is no alternative, I mean, but there is a specific way it's also showing itself. So among workers, ordinary workers, so whatever you say to them, because we're always trying, but you get this sense that, hey, but things will never, ever really change for people like me. So so the way I think about it, and when I get a chance, I say it. I think that is the ANC's biggest crime. You know what I mean? To trample on the socialist vision, you know. And I don't care whether that vision was Stalinist, socialist vision, or Maoist, those debates. But the idea that there is no alternative to capitalism, they pushed it and they succeeded. That's why they can go and kiss Trump's ass, because there is no other, let's say, economic developmental strategy except just to continue, working with those guys who are responsible for our problems in the first place.
Right.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So this is that's why now when they do the government of national unity, it's a choice they made. They didn't have to, you know that. Yeah, they could have run a minority government because they've got 40%, Yeah, but they decided to link up with center-right parties. Can you see? Even racist right parties like the Freedom Front Plus, this is like National Party reincarnation. So basically, they retreated, not even from socialism, but from the mandate of national liberation. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So, is there anything developing from the grassroots? Some struggles like in the townships or something like that.
Yeah, here there's always protest. People are protesting either there's no electricity, there's no water, there's a problem with sometimes they protest around crime, don't give the rapist bail. So there is always ferment. Can you see? There's always ferment all over the show. Yeah, yeah. And maybe 5% of that ferment might be very negative, as in with xenophobic demands. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, we don't want these people, or even more, maybe 10%. Can you see? But certainly, people are not sitting back. They are not reconciled to their fate. Can you see? Yeah. Obviously, at the moment, so protest is protest, Comrade John. It needs a political solution, if you know what I mean. Yeah, yeah. So you cannot divorce that protest from what are the political ideas which drive the protest. What are the solutions? Yeah. So I think that's where we're being stuck now. Because remember, with the government of national unity, people are skeptical. They are bringing back the whites, but also, hey, maybe the whites will improve it. Can you see? Protest, for example, where I'm working at University of Johannesburg, I got involved. Some workers are trying to form a new union. Okay? Yeah. And then remember, we were members of NUMSA because NUMSA organized in our university. So we joined. They even had a strike. And then it turns out that this union, it's actually an MK thing. Can you see? Yeah, yeah. So what I'm trying to show you that even that ferment, you also get climate justice struggles, you get cost of living struggles, you get, for example, the proposed increase in VAT. There were some protests, sometimes led by SAFTU, the South African Federation of Trade Unions. So you get all that. But my point was the political question is always there, So what, do you know what I mean? So that's where we stuck. Yeah. Of course, some comrades, some in SAFTU, but I won't say the very top leadership. Maybe in some unions, there's this what we call movementism. All it is just a movement. We don't want political parties, whatever, or workers' party. No, we just want, we must fight on the ground, which it's got something, but no amount of militancy is going to answer by itself the political question. No.
Right.
No, it can't. You know what I mean? Yeah. We had this 2020 or 2023 or 22, what I call July days. There's this rioting, massive, looting of shops and factories. 300 people died, you know what I mean? Billions of rands of stolen goods. It all came to naught because there was no political project, or there was no one was able to turn it into something other than just a riot.
Maybe on a final note, and this is partly just how can I put this? Very personal message, I just recently turned 79. And
wow, you look like a boy, man. Okay, you're encouraging me. I'm turning 65, so
you see this? That's part of it. But anyway, for all of us who spent many years in the struggle and have not yet made their peace with capitalism or the capitalist apologists, the opportunists like in the union movement and so on. I mean, I've been thinking about this for myself personally and thinking, well, at this stage in my life, what can I do? And what you talked about continuity and how it's been broken, and doing our best to revive the best traditions of the working class, whether that be in the United States or South Africa, whether it be in 1985 and 86 in South Africa or the 1930s in the United States. To revive those traditions, or we can't revive them, but we can point to them and help people see, because they're not dead completely, right? They're still, they might be buried underground, but they're still there, and they find their way to the surface. For instance, in some of the protests you're talking about. So there's that on the one hand, and also making those international connections, which I think is so important. Like, so much of what you're talking about has real, how can I put it? Has real connections with anybody that's serious about a movement against Trump and against reaction and so on in the United States. I was just in Germany. I would say the same thing with some of the people that I met there. So there's those two things. One is trying to, develop that continuity, and well, they're not separate. develop that continuity and making those international connections, which is part of that continuity. And we're not talking about connections at the top, but direct international workers connections, direct international links. What are your thoughts about those two things? And any thoughts about anything that we can do to further that?
Yeah. So, no, I agree fully. So, for example, even this thing of this Trump thing with Ramaphosa, I mean, is of interest to people in everywhere in the world. So we should be talking to each other. What are the workers in the US? What are the comrades saying in the US? And we share perspectives. And then also, the right-wing populists, they will continue unless they find an obstacle, unless they find a resistance. And remember, I think 80% or maybe 70%, I'm just saying, of what they do it's propaganda.
Right.
Like just yeah. So
It's just what they call
we can also do that. We can also do that, you know what I mean? Yeah. So through joint platforms, you know, um, so instead of American audiences, workers seeing Ramaphosa at the top, they can talk to a worker here. This is the situation, or a socialist here. This is social, and then also some kind of exchange. These days we've got Zoom and things. We can also get some money to have some people visit a place. It means a lot. Like that's why I was telling you about this professor who came. It was a small thing, just a guy, but I'm I'm certain it left an impression. A guy from Texas, and he's telling us, yeah, yeah. In any case, personally, here at 65, you have to retire, but there is always the possibility of a three-year post-retirement deal. So I've been, and my head of department is talking about this. So I've been thinking a lot. But I've decided, I know, man, I must just. I was proud in the past for 20 years. I used to call myself a full timer. You know what I mean? Because I was just doing struggle a bit as a trade unionist, and then later building these movements. You know what I mean? Yeah. So I'm really up to working on these issues, and it's not so much because I'm a socialist. There's such a vacuum, John. Yeah, it's just terrible. And 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 also, like I say, with all this propaganda, talk, and so there's a voice which is missing. And in politics, there can be no vacuum. So someone plugs it. So I remember last night I was even thinking, writing down, I must start preparing. We should have a YouTube channel. I know a guy who's doing some work for me at work, a very good youngster with websites, like intervene. And of course, we've got the advantage, like we know how to do grassroots mobilizing, door to door. Can you see? Yeah. So this is something, I'm really up to it, But I'm telling you, I had to talk to my ex-wife, because we've got kids. So my financial situation is important for her to talk to my students, talk to my HOD. I haven't talked to my comrades because I know they'll say, good, exactly. But yeah, we need, we need to work on those worker to worker. Actually, me, I want to build a workers' party. To be honest, yeah, I don't know. I just and now I'm thinking, look, a workers' party requires unions, but we tried it with NUMSA. You know what I mean? Yeah. So I'm now thinking maybe, we should build these movements, whatever, but be quite open, on this. I think we used to do that in a case with SCC. The working class needs a workers' party, you know, because we need an alternative. And my fear is that, if MK, EFF, and them, I don't think that they will take power as themselves. They'll link up with some other party. You know what I mean? Yeah, which will so-called force them to shift to the right or to the center. You know what I mean? Yeah. But they will bring their constituency. And then our struggle will be postponed. Liberation will be postponed for another 10, 20 years, John. 20 years. This is what's going to happen.
As far as a workers' party, I mean, that's something that many socialists, myself included, have been talking about for decades and decades. I think that it's not going to happen in the absence of a movement from below, which we cannot create. The conditions will create it.
Yeah.
And so the
But
best,
you can prepare.
Yeah. So we can beat our heads against the wall trying to build something that conditions, make impossible at this point. All we can do is kind of advocate for things and organize. And so, but I really hope that we can find some way, like this conversation that we're having. Obviously, It's being recorded. I'm going to put it out there. What I'll probably do is edit it down somewhat, to bring out the key points. I really hope that we can carry it forward and maybe organize some kind of forum for some young people and some workers in our respective countries to start to build those links and revive the traditions, the best of which is international working class solidarity.
Yeah. And we've got youth here. I've got youth like that youth I was telling you about. They're not many, but they'll certainly benefit. And, they participate in climate justice struggles. So, they know what's going on.
Right.
And they could bring other youth, Yeah, so that's a possibility. Yeah. But I was just telling you, I've got this burning need to do more. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
If you know what I mean.
Yeah. So, on that, do you have any final words, a message to comrades, to workers and young people here in the United States? Well, not just the United States, around the world, actually.
Yeah, but I can start with the USA. So my view is that, Trump is going to mess up the world, but the first people to pay will be Americans. You know what I mean? Yeah, I think that's just, and I think they're already paying because um, political, spiritual turmoil, when you don't know what's going to happen, that's hardship and suffering. Can you see? Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I really pledge my solidarity with the American working class, with the people there, with the comrades there, you know, are with them, and they have to be strong, and I can't preach to them, but what we've been discussing, this is a fascist without fascism. The slide has to be stopped, and it can only be stopped through organization, mobilization. But I can see there's a lot of effort because I see there's protests against Trump. So they must keep that one up. Yeah. And then Trumpism is an inspiration to other right-wing movements in Europe. Certainly in South Africa, you saw with all these people being refugees. Yeah, so actually the world, you know, humanity faces the same problem. Yeah. Remember, Trump and them, they're going to destroy the environment, drill, baby, drill. So there's so much which requires us, to unite, to work together. And Trumpism, the strategy is divide and rule. So South Africa will go, kiss his ass. The next day is Lesotho. The next day is UK. But as workers on the ground, we can unite and speak with one voice and say no. I think that's my message. Yeah. Lastly, socialism is not only possible, it has to happen. So I'm completely against this idea that there is no alternative to capitalism, or that if you disrupt economies in favor of building an alternative, it doesn't make sense. So, but it must not be socialism from above. We've seen the history. It must be from below. Yeah.
Thanks very much for your time, Trevor. And I hope that we can stay in contact and find some ways to work together.
Thanks, John. Keep up the struggle there.
Yeah. I'm too old to change.
Yeah, I've said that before. I don't know.